All right. Sarah, do you think we should go ahead and get started?
Yes, let's go ahead, Hannah.
All right, let's do it. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today from wherever you are joining us. First, I wanted to say welcome to Artifact's Impact by Design series. So this is a community event series. It's a space that we created for purpose-driven innovators to inspire and also to be inspired, to exchange and challenge ideas, and also to evolve methods in creating positive change through design. And I also wanted to give you all who are joining today an applause for showing up to a talk that has the word responsible and ethics in it. I know the word ethics and responsible can be a really loaded term, and some people see this word and they think I'm a moral, upstanding person. I'm ethical, don't point your fingers at me. Others see it and their eyes sort of glaze over. They think it might be a thought experiment. But what Sarah and I really want to do today is talk about what responsibility in tech means within your organization and within design. So what is ethics when it comes to design? Is it design that does no harm, design that aims to make change, do good, but good for who? Is it good for me? Is it good for my audience of use, good for my shareholders, good for the planet? So what we're going to learn together today and discuss is how to explore ethical thinking and questioning in design and innovation processes. So what to expect before we jump into introductions and tell you a little bit about ourselves. This webinar is going to be about an hour, but we will reserve at least 20 minutes at the end for open questions and dialogue that you all may have. And what you can also expect throughout is we have a few moments within our presentation where we're going to be asking questions of you all. And so with these questions, they're yellow slides, so you'll know when they come. And we would love to just hear from you in the chat and just hear some of your answers to them as we go. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I would love to first have Sarah Drinkwater, my lovely co-host, introduce herself.
Thank you. Thanks, Hannah. I'm Sarah Drinkwater. I'm normally based in Oakland in California. Currently for this winter back in the UK. As you might be able to tell from my accent, I am British. I sometimes talk too fast when I get excited, which with this topic is very often. So I would ask you to do me a favor as listeners. When I start going too fast, please put it in the chat and I promise I will slow down. So Omidyar Network has been going for the last 15, 16 years. We were founded by Pierre and Pam Omidyar of this old eBay. And really, we were founded and grew up in Silicon Valley alongside many of the largest companies of our time. And for the first 15 years, we were very much impact investors. We put money, for profit and non-profit, into various companies in areas like civic empowerment, financial inclusion, education, things that we still really care about. But it became clear to us in the last couple of years that the problems that were the most thorniest, biggest, wicked problems of our time were not going to be solved by individual companies. They're going to be solved by different approaches, whether it's thinking about policymaking, thinking about community building, thinking about kind of community plays and influence, which is something that I'm really passionate about. So in the last year or so, we've spun out a lot of those individual investment teams, and Omidyar Network is really looking at two big themes. One is around reimagining capitalism. Very important topic. I'm glad that we have 10 people on this tiny problem, and the team that I co-lead around beneficial technology. And that's really looking at how do we get to a tech ecosystem that is fair, inclusive, accessible, innovative. And to me, that word innovative is really important. I'm a technologist. I've been in tech for the last 15 years. Before that, I was a journalist. And so often when we talk about responsibility, we're presuming that it means less tech. We're presuming it means bad tech. And I don't believe that at all. I feel really strongly about it. And it's really exciting for me to see that we have people from all over the world. I've lived and worked in like India and Germany and Israel and now the US. And I think so often we center this conversation on Silicon Valley. And of course, the world of technologists is so much broader than that. And I'm particularly excited that we have the full gamut from whistleblowing through to ThoughtWorks. That's a nice, beautiful spectrum that speaks to a lot of what we're going to be discussing today.
Thanks, Sarah. And my name is Hannah Hoffman. I am design director at Artefact. I work at the intersection of human-centered design, visual design, and also workshop facilitation. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Artefact, we are an independent agency that specializes in both design and strategy. So whether we're helping our clients create meaningful experiences or developing methods to prepare our clients to face the future, we do all of this work under our guiding principle of responsible design. which at its core means that while we work for our clients and their businesses, we serve people, society, and the planet. And working with Sarah and the Omidyar Network to work on the Ethical Explorer Pack project was just such an absolute joy. And so a little bit more about Artefact. Our work spans that large variety. On the left here is the Ethical Explorer Pack, which is exactly what we'll be talking about today. But on the right are a few other of my favorite projects that I've had the privilege to work on at Artefact over the last 2 years. So in the upper right, Tangerine, we also work, of course, within a lot of product design. Tangerine was a very long-term project at Artefact that I joined towards the end. But essentially this project was aimed to transform Tangerine's banking experience into a sophisticated and friendly digital financial ecosystem that helped Canadians make smart decisions with their money. And then in the bottom right, we also work with Splash, which is local to Seattle. They are a nonprofit whose mission is to increase access to clean water and improve hygiene habits. They serve children all over the world. And we partnered with them to plan and facilitate a summit of global leaders and experts to brainstorm new delivery models and health behavior interventions for their mental health programs in both Ethiopia and India. But as I mentioned, the Ethical Explorer Pack that we're going to be talking about today has definitely been one of my favorite projects and a favorite project at Artefact. And so from here, now is our first opportunity to hear from all of you. And we have this first question that I feel like is a really big question, but an important one to what we're going to be talking about today. What is the role of a designer? So I'd love the opportunity for those of you who are on the call to just go ahead and answer this question in a few short words. In your mind, what is the role of a designer? It's definitely been burning hot in my mind over the many years of my career. The role of designer, builder, product manager, I feel like is growing and evolving. And so I would love to hear from you. I see the role of a designer.
Gorgeous first answers,
for the
right?
human. Yes, advocate for
Thanks,
the user.
Alex. Way to set the tone super high. I love it.
That's great. All right, so as we continue hearing from folks for what the role of a designer is, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, and Sarah's going to tell us a little bit about how we got here.
Thank you. So my background pre-joining Omidyar Network, I was launching and in early stage startups in Europe, mostly leading around content and community for a bunch of failed companies that you won't have heard of. And the last one got quite successful and we sold it to Yelp, which from the outside does look like a success in lots of different ways. You know, certainly in Europe in 2010, there weren't many acquisitions like that. But for me, it was a really complicated experience because I saw my job as the first non-technical person in that team, the only woman. I was the community lead, and my role was to advocate for people who were helping us make the product richer. And it was a really complicated position because a lot of my time I was partnering with engineers, partnering with designers, but I wasn't either of them. It was my job to kind of really go in and advocate for the user, advocate for the human, as you're saying. And so often the tension between how we made money and what my job was resulted in bad outcomes. And then for the last 5 years before I joined Omidyar Network, I was at Google building spaces for entrepreneurs all around the world. And what was really interesting is I was working for this company that I came to realize over time was a mega corporation that did things that I didn't love, while at the same time building spaces that felt really meaningful to me. And I got to kind of see in real time this decline in the Silicon Valley narrative. You know, when I was building companies, we looked to America the whole time. We looked to this very particular part of the world and we said, move fast and break things, growth at all costs. That very much was the dominant narrative. And in the last couple of years, it became really clear that things were changing. And 2018 for me was a huge inflection year. Beyond the fact that I left Google and joined Omidyar Network to spin up this new initiative, you know, social scientists have been ringing the bell for years about the problems in technology. You know, whether it was Sophia Noble and the algorithms of oppression, or Ruha Benjamin, or Alondra Nelson, you know, there were very clear Astrid Taylor, Sherry Turkle. What do this group have in common? They're all not men. You know, there were an awful lot of social scientists who've been talking about the problems of dominant technology ideas for a long time. Unfortunately, many people in tech hadn't really paid attention until this moment, in my mind. And 2018, let's just pause there for a minute. 2018 for me was really interesting because, first of all, so many of my peers and colleagues in tech began to ask harder questions of themselves. but they didn't really know what to do. They kept thinking, okay, what's the role of my company? I'm increasingly seeing headlines every day in the papers telling me that I'm not doing enough. You know, I think for me, Zuckerberg in front of Congress in 2018 was a really interesting inflection point, because I think it revealed to many of our dismay how little Congress understood how tech works. You know, that famous quote is, Senator, we sell ads, because this group questioning didn't know at the time how Facebook made money. You know, you contrast that with this year, and we're in a very different world, and the Congress came prepared and did an amazing job. But it meant that in 2018, when we had this conversation on how we improve technology and make it really work for society, it often became a regulatory conversation. I think that's important, but for me as a technologist, I think there's a far stronger role that we can play as a community, whether we're designers, developers, thinkers, founders, all those people's collaborators. You know, we were really curious about this they do. You know, regulation time, democracy should not move at the speed of tech. That's pretty clear to all of us, I think, now in this year more than ever. Regulation takes time. Compelling solutions like new startups that come up and disrupt the dominant companies also take time, although I'm very excited by them. So our thinking when we first began working on this was, okay, what resource do we create and make free that really works for this group? It has to be digestible, it has to be accessible. And this is what we came up with, Ethical OS. And we're really proud of this, but I look back at it now and it's so of its era. You know, it's a big deck, it's kind of clunky, you know, and people loved it. It got used an awful lot. You know, the idea was that we had 16 risk zones. So it was totally DIY. As an engineer, you could bring it into your team, you could flick through it with your colleagues. But to be honest, I was never totally satisfied with it. Classic PM at heart. I was always like, oh, we could improve this, we could make it better. And so maybe a year ago, we began thinking deeply. You know, we'd seen Artefact's work around the tarot cards of tech, and we were super in love with them as a partner. And they were, as Hannah said, they were absolutely fabulous. We kept observing kind of changes in the scene. And one thing that I'm really passionate about, and it sounds as if a few of you on the call are as well, is decentralizing power. You know, if there's one massive theme between 2018 and 2020, it's in 2018. And I think of this is my own mental shift, as well as I think a shift we've seen outside, is in 2018, we still thought that the leaders would change their minds. And I think it's become very clear this year that no, it's going to be the workers that lead the change. You know, you see this in the rise of unionizations at Kickstarter, at Glitch, at newsrooms across the globe. You see this in the successful walkouts we've seen in various organizations, which we're very proud to have funded through companies like Coworker. I am really, really passionate about helping individuals step into their power. That's been a big thread in my career in many different ways. And Ethical Explorer is one part of that. It's about saying to this group, how do you know, the group that question, the group that push back, the group that speak back in their teams, how do we help them do more? How do we help build resilience in this group? And how do we help them build far better, cooler products because of it?
And so we want to ask you, after thinking about this big shift that Sarah talked about since 2018, now looking ahead at the future, what do you think is the biggest risk facing the tech industry today? And when you respond in the chat, remember to also include panelists and attendees so everyone can see your thoughts and your wonderful ideas. But we'd love to hear from you. What do you think is the biggest risk facing the tech industry today? So go ahead and take about 20 to 30 seconds to think about this prompt, and go ahead and think about it a little bit and share it with us.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful risk, being complacent, right?
Growth for growth's sake. Trust. It's a big one. Short-termism. Oh, that's great. Business over human.
Yeah, it's all true, completely.
Great. All right. So thinking about that shift, in 2019, last year, we partnered with the Omidyar Network and spoke with project managers, designers, developers, founders, subject matter experts to really learn how they were thinking about responsible design and ethical thinking in their work. So we really wanted to understand, like, what challenges are they facing, what's worked for them and what hasn't, what tools are they using to help think about these long-term risks. And what we found is that many of these stories had one thing in common, is that having these discussions around ethics within their teams felt like total uncharted territory. It often felt like a solo adventure of one person who was leading the way, and also an adventure that a lot of folks in tech didn't feel totally prepared for. So we started to think about, how can we approach the evolution of the ethical OS toolkit that Sarah told us about? We started to think about, what does it really feel like to be an explorer? I think there's kind of 3 different ways that you can approach exploration, right? There's option 1, you strap on your boots, you set out on your adventure, you hope for the best. Unless you are Bear Grylls, this probably isn't gonna work out great for you. Option 2, maybe you have a map so you know where you're headed, but along the way, maybe you kind of underestimate how hard that path really is. Sort of our planning fallacy kicks in, right? Our tendency to underestimate the amount of time or risk involved in completing something, even if it contradicts our past experiences. But then there's option 3, right? You plan ahead, you collect all of the necessary gear, maybe even talk to living experts who know this area well for advice. And now you head into your adventure with intention and the confidence that you can weather whatever nature has to throw at you. So this is a metaphor, but obviously the reality is that all 3 of these options really won't prevent danger, but preparing you will help spot risks sooner and help you better navigate the risks that you do encounter along the way. So I think one thing that we definitely found is, it's naive to think that when you are facing the unknown, that nothing could possibly go wrong. And it's honestly no different when you're creating technology. So that's why we evolved the Ethical Explorer Pack. It was designed to bring that same sense of adventure, but also intention into tech development processes. So it's really a lightweight invitation to start having deeper conversations around design decisions. So we know that ethical decision-making is rarely black and white, it's rarely binary. There's not always a very simple solution either. But our hope is that the Ethical Explorer Pack helps individuals within teams start small and start by asking important questions. So now let's talk a little bit about what's in the pack, how to best leverage it now that you understand the origin. So what's included in the Ethical Explorer Pack is, it has basically 3 main parts. The tech risk zones, which are a series of cards that help you think about scenarios around risk in tech, helps you start thoughtful conversations through questioning. There's also the field guide, which includes an overview of the Ethical Explorer Pack. It also has some really great activity ideas at different altitudes, depending where you are in the design process, to help your team think about these issues. And also just how to build buy-in in your teams, which we heard is obviously one of the hardest things. I think it definitely came up when in our last question of the biggest risks facing technology. If your metrics of success are one thing, it's really hard from an incentive standpoint to be building tech in an ethical way. And then finally, we also have the sticker set. So we heard this loud and clear that folks in tech love stickers and they want to show off what they care about and different groups that they're a part of. And so we wanted to create a set of stickers that show off people's passion for safer and healthier technology. And so what Sarah and I are going to walk you through are basically these 3 principles of the Ethical Explorer Pack. It centers around supporting human values, creating a culture of questioning, and igniting change through dialogue. So I'm going to first walk you through the section on human values. So we built this around this idea that it's vital for us to be intentional about building technology that really values those fundamental human rights, that empowers people and also creates that healthy online experience. We heard in our interviews as a product leader, people often ask themselves, 10 years from now, when I'm thinking down the road, how will we look back at the human impacts that we create? How are we thinking about the legacy of what we're creating? And so what we did is we framed each of our tech risk zones around these ideas of human values. So right now we're looking at our surveillance card, which basically talks about all the ways in which there's intrusive forms of surveillance. But I think the most important thing that I want to draw your attention to is the piece on the bottom around how will we protect privacy. So this was a really important piece for us when creating the Ethical Explorer Pack, and I think it is an important piece for us all to consider when we're designing, is not only are we designing against danger or risk, but we're also designing in service of something positive. And so across each of our risk zones, what we did is we created basically core human values that are associated with each. So when we're thinking about bad actors, we're thinking about how will we instead promote civility. We're thinking about biases and algorithms. How will we instead promote fairness, enable equity when we're talking about exclusion, promoting truth when it comes to disinformation, healthier behaviors, promoting choice when it comes to outsize power, and also protecting privacy and surveillance, and also transparency when it comes to data control. And so we wanted to make sure that this was something that was integral and foundational to what it means to be an ethical explorer. And my question for you all next is basically completing this statement. I will design for blank. Whatever brought you here today, whether you're a builder, maker, designer, product owner, founder, let's go ahead and sort of make that stance for ourselves and fill in this word. So no matter what project you're on, what tech you're building, what do you want to stand for in your work? Is it healthy behaviors? Is it dignity, compassion? I see inclusion, belonging, connection, well-being. Those are all great. And so I think it's important for us to have these values as something that we often look to no matter what type of project we're on, to remind ourselves that we have control over designing for respect, designing for betterment, designing for well-being. And so next, what we will walk you through, Sarah will walk you through, is creating a culture of questioning.
So you heard from Hannah that the reason we created this archetype of the ethical explorer is we wanted to kind of celebrate and reflect people that are doing this now in their companies. I'm guessing many of you do this in your companies. These are the people that are speaking up, pushing back, asking questions. You know, we believe that the more we have dialogue, we'll come to better outcomes individually, but also collectively. And, you know, you look at Coinbase today, and it's very clear that Coinbase put out a statement that feels great for a very particular kind of old-fashioned leader, but many in the community are like, oh, actually, you've missed out XYZ. When you say Black Lives Matter, we don't really believe it because of this other thing you did. You know, I think we're in a moment in history where to not question, to not have this culture of dialogue feels kind of wrong, to be honest. And I think particularly our goal with this kit was really to empower these conversations. The tool itself is not complete, right? It's a gateway drug into what we're hoping to help these users of the kit achieve, which is good, honest conversations to lead to better outcomes, better product decisions, better business decisions. You know, we know that the kit itself, what we've heard so far from early users, is that it's really about having an influence tool that people can use to kind of bring into a one-to-one, into a group conversation that they can use and leverage. And, you know, we think that speaking up is powerful. I love this quote: my strategy is to start conversations with people to raise the floor, not the ceiling. We think that the more we have conversation, the more heard people will feel, the more they will belong, the more we'll get some better sense of equity in an industry that desperately needs help with equity as a whole, I think. And that's a value that felt critically important to us.
Yeah, and so the risk zones really represent the dangers that lie ahead. So when they were created, we know that it doesn't cover all risk zones ever that existed. In fact, we even created our own sort of one-off card, like you can see right here, where people can fill in their own risk zones depending on what technology industry they're in. But this is a really great place to start. So Sarah, maybe you want to walk us through sort of what the tech risk zones are, and then I know we have a specific disinformation card that we can sort of walk through the meaning.
And I was just going to say, you know, we had we built this kit over the winter with a lot of user feedback, and what was interesting is the debates we had about what we should and shouldn't include. You know, we kind of wanted 8 cards. We wanted to keep it very neat. At the time, the pandemic was brewing, but it wasn't entirely on our shores. Sustainability was a huge, we went back and forwards over that card an awful lot. And in the end, we had outsize power and sustainability, and that was traded off against each other. And given my obsession with capitalism and business models, and the fact that that seemed to really resonate with the people that we were trying to serve, we opted for that. I'm still not sure we made the right call. I think that's going to bother me that we didn't include such an important card. So feedback, very welcome in the chat. So looking at the risk zone cards, you have one card that kind of outlines the problem, noting that it's incredibly hard to cover such complicated topics in one card. If you look on our website, we have further reading, which highlights many of the academics that we worked with for these cards to create in the first place. But secondly, these cards really give you a set of questions that you can use in dialogue backwards and forwards to, you see with disinformation here, to kind of really dig deep into a particular topic area. How we promote truth. We're really trying to kind of both outline the problem and why it's important, but also help to move the conversation from, we heard in the user feedback sessions very often, this problem is so big, we can get stuck talking on it. How do we move forwards into action? So we were trying to kind of really balance, and I think this is hard to do, and I hope we did it okay. We tried to balance an introduction to the harm, but then also a prompt to move the conversation forwards into the what could we, how will we? Exactly, Cameron. There's an awful lot of other resources out there that we link to on our website, but this for us was really a very digestible, accessible toolkit that was kind of a gateway in for many designers and developers who are newer to this field. And so the sort of set of cards we have here, it's partly about understanding where we are now, like taking kind of a scan of the risks that we see around us. What does our product do? What have we designed it to do? What have we incentivized ourselves to do? I think these are really important questions to cover, but also can be very hard to cover dispassionately. So we were trying to give a set of easy questions that you could pose in a group setting that would spring up these kind of answers. And then looking at the shift to how we promote truth, it's very much around what could, how might, what might. It's kind of part Imagineering, part sort of horizon scanning of what could come ahead, but also thinking about, okay, what are alternative futures we could imagine for ourselves? How could we reorient what we've built so far, how we incentivize ourselves, how we see our place in the world? And again, we note that these are not perfect questions. These are really the kind of where we landed in terms of getting these kind of conversations into this setting.
So there's different ways to really use the risk zones depending on exactly where your team is at. And so what we can talk you through a little bit is the field guide, and just give you a little bit of taste of what's in there. We can talk a little bit, I think, about the workshops and different ways that you can use the tech risk zone activity cards. So the field guide has basically a different set of activities, and they're at five different levels. There's exploring on your own. There's exploring how to build habits, exploring the positive, and exploring how to improve, and also exploring within a workshop. Sarah, is there anything that you want to add around the workshops, or how they were created, or how you see them being used?
I think our goal with this was to make it as practical as possible, right? So often with these resources, they're, I think for me, having come directly from a tech environment, particularly having worked with a lot of early stage founders, as I did in my bread and butter for the last 5 years, one thing I would hear very often, because I was obsessed with responsibility for a long time, is, I don't really understand this. I feel like we need a specialist. We kept hearing this anxiety around ability to contribute. So the goal with these scenarios really is to make it incredibly easy. How do you celebrate what's going well? To me, that's important, because there are very few companies getting everything right, but nearly every company is getting one thing right, at least. There's the exploring the workshop, which is really where you can put your entire product roadmap against this set of problems and kind of work out where you are. There's the one-to-one. It was really about making it very simple for users to get stuck in fast. And of course, you can use it any one of a number of other ways too. These are just our sort of initial suggestions.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said, Sarah, about the exploring the positive one as well, because that was something that we heard when people were sort of sorting through all of the tech risk zones. It was good, I think, to celebrate places where they're not having issues just as importantly as where they are having issues. Yeah. And also we heard a lot around too exploring how to build habits. This one in particular, I think, goes really hand in hand with the exploring on your own. These are both the ones that you see on the left here. And we heard from folks who are maybe new in their career or just starting out or at the product manager level even. We're beginning to say that I just want some time to feel confident around some of the issues that are happening in the technology space so that I can have better conversations with my team in a more casual way, because I don't feel confident going right to the top and saying that this is an issue. So it's definitely meant, I think a lot of these activities are meant to, although you can use them in any way, in any order, there is a way that you can also sort of build on them and begin to build habits within your teams to ask some of these questions, and also ways to explore it on your own as well.
But it's really interesting you mentioned that, because I think one thing I think about an awful lot, and I think the Coinbase example is a good one here. The work that we funded around whistleblowing and tech worker organizing, so much of that work is led by marginalized folks in technology that are underrepresented. So many of the people that speak up about problems tend to be those with the most to lose. And we first of all want to arm those people with as much as possible. The resilience this group needs to be listened to more. I wish that we didn't have to fight for such a basic thing for this group, but it feels like that's a good place to start. But I think looking at the downloads so far, we've had thousands of downloads. It's really interesting looking at the mix between very senior people, founders, and then lots of kind of mid-management. And I think that's, our whole thesis this year is really around workers will drive the change. Change will not come from the VPs. Change will not come from the CEOs, because the incentives are not aligned. But I think there's something really interesting around, you look at the launch of Somewhere Good by Najma Adal last week. You look at the launch of Eternal by Reg. I'm thinking of people's Twitter handles rather than their full names, so pardon me for not knowing surnames. But there's something really interesting around, if I think about the companies that I most admire doing really interesting, responsible technology, where their whole ethos and what they're doing is just cool and it's responsible at the same time. So many of those companies are founded and led by folks that find the conventional tech scene just doesn't suit them. It just discriminates against them for who they are. And I think that's something that to me is also a major risk. Like ultimately the most dominant companies in the world are overlooking all kinds of talent out there and overlooking certain user groups that will build a whole new internet somewhere else. But then there's the challenge of pluralism and how you kind of think about equity and bringing people together and is it more important to kind of change one tiny thing on Facebook and enact billions of users around the world, or kind of build an entire new system? I'm not sure right now. That's something I think about a lot.
Yeah. And with that
was kind of an aside.
Yeah, that was the best
Coinbase,
that was a great.
I was just reading about Coinbase and I'm just furious about it.
That is the best aside ever. Now that we've had a chance to sort of explore the different uses of the Ethical Explorer Pack, we still have a little bit more, but I want to hear from you all. How can you see yourself using the Ethical Explorer Pack, either on your own, in your organization? Let's go ahead and take another 20 to 30 seconds, super quick, to hear how you see yourself using it. Great. We did talk to quite a few folks also in the education system as well, Sarah. I'm seeing some people talk about that as well. And it's nice to see these conversations around ethics becoming more and more ingrained, I think, in student life. That's good.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly cool. We funded Responsible CS 2 years back. So I'm an English Lit graduate who ended up managing engineers. So I'm an unusual example. But given that so much power in tech is held by engineers, for better or for worse, we funded an effort 2 years back to kind of embed ethics into undergraduate computer science education at something like 20 different US universities. And what's interesting is this is not, this is a mandatory course now. People love this topic. And yet when engineers graduate and go to be hired into tech companies, they're judged on hours of coding. So the fact that they've taken this course actually reflects badly on them as they go into the hiring system. So that's the next step for this program, is how do we help make this group seem white labeled and even more special than they normally would be,
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I see great answers coming through. we'll go ahead and just wrap up with our last guiding principle, which is igniting change through dialogue. So we definitely found in talking to people that first, a lot of time comes that mindset shift, then comes the integration with processes, and then comes that larger organizational shift. So that culture of questioning, of igniting dialogue, the questions themselves aren't necessarily like the end of what we're aiming for, but we're trying to create more common practices along the way of questioning, and questioning what decisions are really in service of within teams. So this was a great quote that we heard. Everyone has that different definition of what is good. And so I think what works really well about the Ethical Explorer Pack is you can bring your own definition. With your team, you can figure out what is the human value that we're really designing for here. And so within the field guide, we also have these 2 sections that I'm going to tell you about. One is just called Making the Case. And so we know that, like we said, the aim isn't just questioning, it's also to bring it up and to try and make the case so that you can create more lasting organizational change within your team and onward. And so we know that we can't design for every single situation that every single team may ever have ever. And so what we decided to do instead was we talked to quite a few folks to try and figure out who are the people that you're trying to get buy-in from in your organization around some of these issues. And so we began to create some of these framing questions. Like, let's say, for example, you're talking to someone who is more of a realist. You might want to frame some of your statement or into the idea of how do you save on near-term or long-term costs, whether it's financial or reputational, or give us an edge over our competitors. So I think what this page really points to is, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to get buy-in. It would just be a part of culture, but we know that that's not true. And we know that we need to be working within the system that exists right now in technology. And so that also means sometimes speaking the language in order to move your point of view or whatever you're advocating for forward. And another piece that we found really interesting is we also just came up with a few different things that we were often hearing was pushback from folks. So you can see here in the middle, hearing that ethics sounds so philosophical, it's not actionable, it's going to be hard to get traction internally. I think that even came up in one of the chats. And so we had some of the folks that we talked to sort of respond of like, if you've gotten this, how would you instead create a response to it? So whether it's talking about the lessons learned with GDPR, policy that is going to continue to happen, we need to be ahead of it, or in response to how we move fast and continue to do this work around ethics and responsibility. And also the idea that taking responsibility sounds like a full-time job. And for a lot of people, it is. It's hard. It's hard to shoulder a lot of this dialogue continuously, especially as Sarah mentioned, if you're also an advocate in a lot of other different types of groups. And so I think the important point here is that this work shouldn't fall on one person. That's the whole point. And so advocating that it is more established and shared. And so we know that if ethics is still not prioritized with KPIs, with roadmaps, it's really hard to implement good ethical practices when we're just not rewarded for it in the end. So that is a very true piece that we heard loud and clear. But at the same time, the opposite of that is we can't do nothing. And so these guiding principles of the Ethical Explorer Pack are really meant to help sort of start small and start to create that culture of questioning. And Sarah, I would love for you to just have some of the closing words before we jump into questions of just where do we go from here?
Yeah, and my toddler as of yet is not in a risk zone, but who knows? Privacy, his privacy. He's currently naked, so he may come and join us, which would violate his privacy and probably yours as well. Things I'm thinking about a lot right now, I guess. To the conversation in the chat, this is an area with a lot of tension, right? Like doing the right thing is incredibly personal and incredibly subjective, and at the same time has incredible implications for society. One thing I think about a lot is it's comparatively easy for us to know what we don't want. I don't think many of us would want mass incarceration, surveillance state, all of these things that I think take away our liberty in so many different ways. At the same time, there does seem to be a slight need and a vacuum and a challenge around how we co-design where we do want to go. That doesn't seem like it's for any one person to sort of say and push ahead with, because that's the problems that we've been having for the last 15 years. But I think there's something really interesting around beyond the small steps we take, what are the bold bets? What are the bold visions that we have? I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is around, I worry and I'm interested in this whole piece around building a whole new internet. I'm really, as somebody who knows a lot of founders, there's an awful lot of appetite and interest. You've got Neva launching this year, which is a new kind of search engine that respects privacy. That's like a DuckDuckGo, but with a very modern brand. You've got Hey launching from the Basecamp people, which is paid internet. We're starting to kind of understand that that we do not, if we have certain products for free, then we have to expect certain trade-offs with that. Whereas if we pay for the product, we get the product and nothing more. I think there's something really interesting, particularly around consumer social. I think that seems to be on the table again, but okay, how do we want to gather? I think in a year like this, we want to gather more than ever. But at the same time, you look at the hard decisions that somewhere like Twitter has to make around the election. These are not easy decisions that we make. I think there's something about the craft of this work, of trust and safety, of smart engineering, of smart designing, that I think is a whole new field of work. And David Polgar, who's also on the chat, recently brought out a responsible tech guide, delineating what it means to have a career in this space. To my mind, the people in this group are many of the users of products like this, and many more, because this is part of a whole scene of products. I think of this group as really being the next wave of innovation. That's how I've always thought about this kind of work. It's not about less technology, worse technology. It's about better, smarter technology that pushes us away from it when we there are other things taking our attention. That was a big splurge, but I think in general themes are positive vision. I think a whole new talent wave, and not losing sight of the contradictions and tensions that exist in this space. Because if we're really intentional about building a better industry and scene, then that has a lot of choices, right, that we're going to have to make. And thank you, Rob, for putting that doc in. I was just about to do it myself.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I see a lot of also just sharing of,
I love that,
different complementary tools, which is so fantastic. And that's something that I know that we can save, of course, afterwards, and find a way to share it with you all, things that were collected in here. So now we want to open it up for questions that you all have. So feel free to just put them right in the chat and put it to all panelists and all attendees, and I can go ahead and field that for us. And so while we are starting to think of some questions, Sarah, I have one question for you, which is, since the Ethical Explorer launched earlier this year, I'd be curious sort of how the community has responded to it so far. And I would also love to hear, I guess this is a two-part question, if that's okay. You said that you were thinking about sustainability, and that was something that you were considering. What also have you been considering, just sort of like how you would like to evolve the Ethical Explorer, hope that it would continue to evolve in the future?
I mean, I think we've been blown away by the response, to be honest. I think we hoped it would resonate with the community that we built it with and for, but at the same time, the level of downloads has been amazing. What's been fascinating to me is that we said, when people downloaded it or opted in to have it sent to them, we kind of said, can we email you again? Over 95% of people said no, which I love, because it proves, even when we had a disclaimer saying, we promise it'll only be for useful things, in general, people we don't like to be bothered. I get an incredible amount of spam and I don't find it useful. So that to me was a really interesting point, that people who build products themselves do not like this functionality. I think the second thing was the sheer diversity of companies. I mean, obviously, when we looked at it in aggregate, designer was the second largest group of job title that kind of downloaded this. But, people from Yandex in Russia, I had a very funny experience working in Russia a few years back with Yandex that probably is a glass of wine conversation rather than a public webinar. But, proper sort of Wild West kind of stuff. One person from Palantir, fascinating. Imagine being the person at Palantir advocating for this work. It's a hilarious idea. But what was kind of cool is, we've been approached by a lot of companies who are kind of running internal reading groups, running internal sessions. We very much do not see ourselves as being the people running those workshops or talks. We very much want to kind of hand that over to the explorers themselves. And I think on that note, to your second question, we also hope and think this group are those that will help make the toolkit better for the next version. And the question around sustainability, I think, is a massive one around, how do we make this problem 3D rather than 2D in some ways? How do we bring it out of we can so often think of the language of this field, like cloud, for example, to me is a very lovely, benign, away in the fields kind of word. But when you think about Amazon, for example, and the environmental harms of their server farms, the labor practices of their warehouses, that's a very physically grounded harm, isn't it? And I think there's definitely a need to kind of make this jump out of the tubes it lies in under the ground and far more into like, okay, how do we make this kind of come into the physical realm?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. We have one question from David, which is around, let's talk about nomenclature. I love this question. Responsible innovation, responsible tech ethics, ethics AI. And he says, I ask this because there seems to be a slight misalignment between industry needs, education, and individual expectations. I know that while we were doing some of the initial research, we made it a very clear point to ask people's response to the word ethics. So originally, if you remember, the toolkit was called the Ethical OS Toolkit. So we really wanted to understand how were people talking about this within teams, within industries, and what is the language that they were using around it. And we found that responsible and ethics, both were sort of problematic terms, but a lot of people said, I just don't know what else to call it, so that's just what we've started calling it, which I thought was really interesting. And it speaks to, from a nomenclature standpoint as well, I think how language begins to shift over time, and our definition of ethics begins to shift potentially from negative to positive in some ways of how we're using it. I think there's a lot of different tools out there that are calling it many different things.
Yeah.
For us at Artefact, I know that we generally have been using responsibility in ours, but Sarah, I would love to hear if you have any thoughts around nomenclature.
I mean, I wrote a whole Medium post about this because I'm so fascinated by it, like particularly as an English lit graduate and ex-writer. Like I think language really holds us back because we don't use the same words to talk about the same thing. For me, having worked in a few different fields, now being in kind of this funny space of funding and philanthropy, we use different terms to talk about the same things. Where I've come to, and I should note this is a personal choice, and I believe we need collective agreement, but I also do not think that I'm the right, this is just where we have come to as a Omidyar Network is responsible technology. At the same time, I would say, I don't really want to center the tech. I want to center the impact it's having on people and societies. I think responsible is kind of the bare minimum. I want something visionary and more exciting at the front, but I don't know what it is yet. And if you look at that piece, there's actually about 12 different examples I gathered in there off a Twitter thread that I did on this a few months back that, far better examples than I could possibly come up with now. But everything from restorative technology, Sarah Hedren, who I love, who's an amazing thinker on this, small tech, this endless debate around civic and public interest tech. I mean, I really, I would encourage anyone who's interested in that to kind of have a look and comment on it, because I gathered some really interesting comments on the Twitter thread around considerations and also who gets to decide, because let's not forget, history belongs to the storytellers. History often belongs to those that get to name it. If you look at Silicon Valley in the last 20 years, Stuart Brand was behind a lot of the branding of Silicon Valley and making it seem utopian and counterculture. I don't want us to fall. I think we're smarter now. I don't think we'd fall down the same branding loophole that we did then. But still, like we kind of need to, I think with language, you need to be really intentional about who's got the power to decide.
Mm-hmm. That's right. We have another question from Greta that says, what are ways to move from don't create harm to creating space for profound and critical healing? As a nonprofit with a large educational reach, I think our organization plays it safe, when it has the privilege and power to make big strides in big gaps in nurturing kids in the US and globally. Sarah, any thoughts? Any initial thoughts come to mind?
I have
here?
A couple of thoughts. Yeah, I'm really fascinated by this when we think about funding, and forgive me for this digression for just a minute, because I have my funder's hat on here. It was really interesting to me, coming from a conventional tech background, that we had like conventional funding over here, and the goal was loads of money, blitz it all on Facebook ads, do shitty things, shitty company. And then we had impact investment over here, and you'd get like £10 and you'd have to serve 38 million kids. And it very much was a code for like low horizons, low ambition, meaningful stuff. When the Financial Times has a column called Moral Money talking about a third way, I think first of all, we need to expect an awful lot more of conventional tech companies. And give impact focused companies a lot more money and expect less of them. That's just my basic bias, is that a situation where Jeff Bezos gives a billionth of his income to form a school despite extracting a lot of money from the planet seems wrong to me. But then I am British, so who knows? I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is around the world that we're living in right now demands bold bets. You know, we're living in this crazy era of multiple crises at once, whether it's the fight for racial justice or COVID or the environmental crisis in Oakland, which partly sent me back to the UK. You know, we're living in a time where it's very possible that the US is going to go through an incredible period of real unrest. So I think it goes back to, for Greta, how do you persuade your funders and your board members to kind of be comfortable with you taking bigger bets? And secondly, how do you shore up for your team their sanity and their happiness in a year like now? Mm-hmm. Like, how do you at once have the impact you want to have while not ruining your brain? I think those are huge challenges. And I think conventional tech is very well set up to work from home for a long time. They have enormous lobbying teams that are going to be delighted, whatever outcome the election has, they're going to be delighted with it. I think for companies that are really being thoughtful about their impact on the world, it's I think sometimes I would argue this is the year for bold bets. If there was ever a time to go big or go home, I would argue it's this year. I would argue it's now.
Yeah. Another piece for me, Greta, that this also brought up was in terms of hearing from the people you serve and working with them and not designing for them. And one, well, I will add this to the chat later, but another person who I follow, Antoinette Carroll, has created the Equity-Centered Community Design Field Guide, which I feel like does a really great job of figuring out how to connect to communities and have them as a decision maker throughout your entire process, which to me allows for more evidence and dialogue around taking those big gaps or being more, I guess, or less critical about playing it safe. So that's another really great resource to consider and think about.
Right, like I think sometimes I'm on the board of a couple of nonprofits who are having a very similar dilemma right now, and one big consideration for them is they don't want to seem paternalistic. They don't want to seem as if they're presuming a certain need. But I think they have enough evidence in their back. They have the evidence. It's just because they're so thoughtful and so responsible, they don't want to presume. They don't want to kind of step in. And I think part of the job of the board in this case is to kind of really persuade them that the time is now.
Yeah. Sarah, this next one is definitely from you. It said you mentioned reinventing capitalism at the start.
Yes.
Because how can we convince or guide companies to design ethically when it goes against their entire business model?
Yeah, I think this is a huge question. And the reason that we have these twin themes working closely together is they're so intertwined. Like ultimately, you know, particularly having moved to the US this year, I've become really fascinated by individualism versus collectivism. The incentive of more money and more money and more money. I think it's incredibly hard to reimagine a system that you're in. I watched Parasite again for the second time recently, the Korean film, and I was reminded of how perfect that film is and how beautiful it is for this year. And the director gave this really good quote. You know, he sort of said, I made this film about Seoul. I spent a lot of time working in Seoul in my last job, so there's a second reason to love the film. You know, he sort of said, I made the film about class structures in Seoul, and I didn't know if it would resonate outside of Korea. But then I realized that we all live together in this one city called capitalism. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly how it is. We're painting watercolor in a stream that we're standing in. So a lot of that themes work, we call it a theme, we have two themes. A lot of that themes work is really around worker power, you know, shoring up the ability of workers to push back, which is exactly what I do, but in the tech field, coming up with alternatives to kind of neoliberalism, and even being capitalists saying out loud, this isn't working. I didn't realize the power of that. You know, we kind of went live with that work a few weeks back. It's been going for the last year, but we didn't sort of talk about it openly until we had done enough funding work, I think. But, you know, I think there are some really, particularly in a COVID year where businesses are struggling, there are some really interesting trade-offs being made. You know, you look at Hootsuite and ICE this week. Hootsuite's a B Corp. So for them to sign a multi-year contract with ICE, that then got pulled the day afterwards when their employees revolted, you know, Hootsuite had basically damaged their entire brand, and they didn't get the money from ICE anyhow. So more fool them for having a process that first of all revealed that B Corp is weak, but second of all revealed that despite becoming a B Corp, which takes an awful lot of work, they still made a choice that I would argue does not align with B Corp. So I think there's I think this is the role of the employee right now, is to hold your companies to account, to kind of look at the statements they make publicly and look at the work they do privately, and pull out details like what's different between those two. I think for students graduating this year, for all of my younger friends, for all the students that we fund and work with, they are going into the workforce with less choice than ever. They're graduating with enormous student debt. Choice is a luxury in this year. Let's not kid ourselves. At the same time, they have this, the surveys that we've done have always shown that the older a person gets, the longer they work in tech, the less idealistic they become. The more golden handcuffs lock them in, the less choice they feel they have, the more bought into the system they become, the more senior they get. And I think there's such an interesting tension between students graduating with no choice and systems that kind of oppress them and do bad things and say that you're a cog in a wheel. So for me, this is a really interesting opportunity for funders like us that love funding organizing, for these young people going in, how do we help them do their best work? That's not just data design, that's kind of helping the company be what it says it is in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have time, Sarah, for one more question before we wrap up. And it centers around the idea of development of the toolkit, engaging community, decentralizing power in the conversation. So you might be able to speak, I think, a little bit closely to particularly the Outsize Power card, maybe its origin and just some thoughts around it. And that can be our last question for the day.
I mean, that card was a direct reflection on a dinner that we had in New York. So we had a dinner in San Francisco and then dinner in New York. When we had a first version of the card set, we basically took it to 12 people and kind of had a dinner and kind of asked them to play around with it and kind of asked them what they thought. And this is after all the user feedback sessions that we'd had earlier that were kind of far more kind of tactical. And in San Francisco, it was really interesting. We had a great evening that was very practical and talked about how this group would use the kit at work. Many of them worked in big tech. And we had the same dinner in New York with a slightly different group, less big tech workers, a few more consultants, a few more agency people, a few more founders. And in the first 5 minutes, we talked about race and power. And it was so cool. And it made me realize New York is like London in that way. London has all the industries. It has tech, it has media, it has finance. And that's why you can't talk about technology without talking about all of these interlocking systems, because it's all related, whereas San Francisco feels, it's a one industry. It's like Tel Aviv, there's one industry there. And that's why sometimes it can be really hard to, think about technology in context, think about capitalism, think about the role of media, think about the role of money itself in the system. And so when we think about Outsize Power, I'm not saying that all monopolies are bad, but many are, right? If you look at Uber, for example, and what they've done to the cab driver economy, what they've done to worker rights, I think there's a real opportunity and a real moment now for kind of decentralizing power overall. And this is just a very strong personal interest of mine, being a community builder by background. For us as funders, we have always tended to kind of fund through grantees, and the grantees go forwards. And we're trying to get more comfortable over time of having points of view in public, because obviously when you fund work, you have a point of view behind it, right? But you look at the conversation around Coinbase today, which centers around the mission they put forwards works for like a very small group of society and doesn't reflect the group that they think they serve and say they serve. You look at the many of us living in this city called capitalism. I think there's a really interesting moment where we do get to reimagine our systems, not in a theoretical, hairy, hazy, remote kind of way, but in a very practical, how do we want to live? How do we want to connect? We funded a piece of work earlier this year through Mozilla that looked at designing for delight, connection, safety, and privacy in a pandemic with Caroline Sanders, who's an amazing researcher around anti-harassment. And she spoke to a lot of people that in the first wave of lockdown had started new things, not things for money, but things like Bed-Stuy Strong, this amazing mutual aid network, things like Zoom karaoke that my friend in Copenhagen runs. And the main thing she took from that project was incredible optimism. All of the ways that people were using technology in a very sort of patchworky way. The tech wasn't the thing. The human connection was the thing. Helping each other was the thing. And that report made me really, really, really optimistic that we're being asked to do hard things right now in a hard year for all of us, but we have it in us. We have it in us to kind of speak up, push back, design better, do more, think bigger,
Yeah. What beautiful words to end on, Sarah. That's great. I know there were some questions that we didn't get to, and we want to continue the conversation. So here's how you can reach out to Sarah and I, and would love to continue the conversation after our webinar. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
And we will kind of find a way of sharing up, because there are so many amazing resources in here that we'd love to kind of share with you, because I think there are so many things that kind of came up in the chat. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye, everyone.